We often speak about Africa being trapped in Berlinist states. If it's the case that there is a problem with the rearrangement of states, then what should be the model for a unified Africa? So this is the oh yeah, and it continues. Sorry, it says where is it? Should we keep the Berlin states as is or rearrange them on ethnic lines? This is where I wish Gas would come up. I think Gas and Uwa, both Nigerian brothers or brothers from that area, I think they would have a good perspective on this. You guys come up if you can. The link is pinned to the top of the chat. Oh, speak of the devil, there's Uwa Bantum right here now. Uwa, how are you this week?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Peace.
Good to hear. So you see the prompt. We often speak about Africa being trapped in Berlinist states. If it's the case that there's a problem with the rearrangement of states, then what should be the model for a unified Africa? And as it continues, where is it again? As it continues, should we keep the Berlinist states as is or rearrange them on ethnic lines? What say you, Uwa?
I think what I'm seeing is that I wouldn't say ethnic lines maybe, but that there's larger cultural connections that we have as Black people in general, and I'm seeing a lot of states coming together, trying to explore how they're related, like the Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, those countries that overthrew coups. They're exploring a federation. Chad, they're talking to Chad, but it's going to take, like, I don't know how you call it, grassroots research into how they're more related. I know in Nigeria, we have the Bornu Empire, we have the Mali Empire. So when you had to from Chad to all the way to, Mali, Gambia, Burkina Faso, you had to go through Nigeria. And they have communities and kingdoms that were working together, and they kind of were one country at one time because they did business, and there wasn't strict borders. But then you get into the whole concept of race, people who want to do party politics. You get into religion versus animism, which a lot of people don't know. Muslims still have like animist traits. So it's all about a series of decisions that Black people have to make. But I don't think ethnic states purely will work. If you look at Ethiopia, they're always fighting. They have political parties. They don't want to discuss religion or ways to unify. In Haiti, they had to do this whole ritual, boy came on. So it's a lot of discussions. It's not only ethnicity, but there is a historical precedence that people are drawing from to unite. Like, and I'm looking at Chad and Burkina Faso and Guinea and Mali. I'm watching that heavily, and I'm doing my own projects, trying to work with them. But I like other people to speak. So, I'll rest my mic.
I appreciate that. Hang in there. I forgot to read the damn tweet associated with the prompt. It's from Great House on X Spots the Mark. I like that guy. You guys see me posting some of his tweets on the community tab. Great House said he's responding to a tweet that says unpopular opinions that will put you in this position, the African edition. So there's always these kind of trends on social media. There's this trend about unpopular opinions. So I guess this one is the African edition. And Great House responded, dissolve all colonial states and restructure Africa as an ethnic confederacy. He goes on to say, let me explain. Dissolve the current African states. Each ethnic group unites all its people, i.e., Yoruba of Nigeria unite with Yoruba of Benin and Togo. Bakongo of Congo unite with Bakongo of Angola, Gabon and the other Congo, etc., and form their own state on their ancestral land. He goes on. A continental senate is formed. Each ethnic group gets to select one senator to the Continental Senate, Regardless of your population size, everyone gets one representative. This Senate then elects the leader of the federation. The Senate elects a new leader every 10 years. The leader forms a government to oversee things like national defense, international relations, and international trade, etc. Now, I like Greathouse, good historian. So I appreciate his thoughts on this. I like what Gas said earlier too, where Africans have to. I forgot how you put. He said Africans have to do this basically of their own volition. I can't find the prompt right now in the chat. So I'm between these two minds, but I gotta say, I appreciate someone within the diaspora giving thought to these things. Someone who's not on the land, but who I'm certain wants to get back to the land and definitely has a love for the land, has been to the land too. I appreciate that someone like him is thinking about these things. So with that, let me get just a follow-up from Ua on what I just read from the tweet from Greathouse.
Yeah, I think that's viable. But yeah, so it's kind of confusing because, ethnic groups, sometimes that's something you're born into. It's like a language group. But there's also things like take Bakongo that's an example he gave. That's also a kingdom. It's not just a language group. And they were split between 4 states. But then he said Yoruba, which it's like a language group, but it's never been one kingdom, and they argue like cats and dogs about where the capital would be, who's the best Yoruba kingdom, and so it's complicated to form states based on these things. But I think it's getting to that point where you see like there was literally military overthrows in those countries I named before, Chad, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and they pretty much did away with politicians and elections for the time being. And it was just military working with the grassroots chiefs and trying to sensitize people on the need to unite. And there's like I follow some of the activists on ground. They march to the political capital. They talk to the government. They hand them books on a Cheikh Anta Diop basis for a cultural federation. So maybe it'll be better to call it a cultural confederacy, because then you start to look at how these cultures are intertwined. But yeah, sometimes just sometimes saying like ethnic group, for example, Yoruba, that's problematic. It's recent. Igbo, even that one is kind of recent. It's not like they're not even federated with themselves. Like so, it's like kind of kills momentum. I don't know if I'm making myself clear or understood.
No, I get what you're saying. I actually like it too. I see, this is why I like these different thoughts. We got to swirl these thoughts around and make personal sense of it, and then make collective sense of it too. So I appreciate what you're saying. Join the cultures, because at least that shouldn't clash per se. So that's interesting. With that said, let's welcome in Real Black Gentleman this week. Real Black Gentleman, how are you?
What's up, man? I'm good.
What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, this is like kind of my wheel well. I mean, I think almost like a novel way is just, I think African people have to go back to our linguistics. I think that in a lot of senses, how you speak connects you, right? It's easier to be in a nation that's speaking the same language, for starters. It's easy to say, but it's really on the surface the best way. Now, if we are all speaking the same language and we fight each other and have a civil war, that's pitiful, right? You know what I'm saying? If we're going to argue with each other, it's terrible to be, when you're looking on the outside and we're arguing with each other, it's more logical to have disagreements where you're not necessarily speaking the same language. And the nature of languages is that one distinct language or sets of dialects are similar to neighboring peoples. There's a gradient with a lot of languages. If you just look over the world, there's, you might have, French and Spanish, but there's languages in between, around the borderish regions where people understand both. So it's that same idea. If you just look, African linguistics can look at this, and this can just be a temporary measure until there's something a little bit more solid. Because I'm not saying that it's the best way, but it's a way of making sure that at least people understand each other. If you're in a place and if you're speaking the same language, you can at least cooperate. And you can say that we have something or we need something. There's a lot more. If there's in one area of that region where people speaking things, that there can be more cooperation. You see a lot of this if you look at a linguistic map and you see the nations, the political borders, they're all kinds of just jagged up. It's like there should be a country in the middle of West Africa. You know what I'm saying? The way, like, and then that's just one aspect. You might want to have like, where you say like the Igbos in Europe, Yorubas, there are ethnic groups that, and I want to kind of refrain from ethnicity kind of for the same reasons that people were saying before. Like, ethnicities can be kind of a very nebulous thing, you know what I'm saying? Whereas if I'm speaking of language groupings, it is what it is. And boundaries can be set. Then you have geography, you know what I'm saying? You have rivers, mountains, things like that can naturally are natural walls, natural fences that, people can naturally divide themselves. Now, people are going to climb those fences, swim over those rivers, do what they're going to do, but natural boundaries, good fences make good neighbors. You know what I'm saying? For example, Nigeria, if I were to split up Nigeria, I'd just naturally split it up at the Niger and the Benue. I'd have three nations right there, have the rivers be natural boundaries, straight like that. And you could use the Niger. At the same time, you don't necessarily want to use rivers to divide if you can, because it's nice to have both sides of a river. If there's a river valley, these are the complications that, that come into place. I've said it on, this program, plenty of times. I think these borders are garbage. You look at them, even if you're talking about in Algeria, how there's a line just like at a random unnatural like angle. You know what I'm saying? There's all these in the Kalahari Strip. You know what I'm saying? The strips in Namibia. I think it's the what is it called? I don't know. There's like a little strip of land. These little strips, that go off, that are just not natural, that any kind of nation, I think that an African person would not like make that in a map like that. It just doesn't make any sense. These are just lines used to connect resources from the hinterlands to the coast. And as long as African people are in these boxes, and we are looking where you have a whole bunch of African people in these boxes, and they're all looking inside the box, and they're not looking at anyone else outside of these boxes. Then you wonder why China can go into 16 different countries and say, well, it's just domestic. We're not going to interfere in domestic because they are not going to interfere with a broken up state of Africa as imposed by the Europeans. They China, most of the rest of the world has no real interest in a unified, strongly territorially cohesive Africa. You know what I'm saying? And anything that African people can do to allow that to happen. A lot of the, when we talk about a Senate, if we can have an African analog to that, where we, we have, or if it's not, when we say Senate, we want to make sure it's a real Black African Senate, type deal, not just a copycat of Rome again. You know what I'm saying? We know our sensibilities about our culture and how we like to lead ourselves, call and response. You know what I'm saying? These things that we can do. Man, I'm an optimist about it. It's just frustrating when people don't have, and I'll say grace, just to allow things to be instead of like being heavy-handed. I don't want to necessarily be the critique. It's bad, even though there's a lot of good things. It's just, we have an energy of like, there's no rest for the weary. There's just problems. And I wish I could sit here and talk sweet, all the optimistic things, all the good things. But, there's a lot of bad problems. These nations are a whole problem. there should be, I would say, at least be 40 nations in Africa. I mean, I mean, whether or not that's by invasion or by cooperation, I think, you know what I'm saying, Africa is going to have a testing ground where a lot of political cohesion comes into place. I just think that if you want to avoid a lot of conflict, I think you really should think about language as a unifying factor. Look at where the people are who speak the language, draw the lines tentatively in pencil so you can kind of erase them over time. And then over time, let things, concretize so you have a generation that can function in their relative groupings. And it's not going to be an absolute hard and fast thing where all black people are going to, ideally that'd be the case. And I mean, that would involve further and further generational integrations and just understanding that, of course, it's not just a language that we can figure out linguistics, and people in West Africa can figure out what's going on in South and in East Africa. That linguistics cannot be a barrier. I mean, if these white folks can go on these boats and get interpreters to figure out what's going on with hand gestures and stuff, come on, black people can figure this out from Senegal to Somalia. I'm going to yield the mic.
Yeah, thank you for that, RBG. How Shall Podcast, D-Web asks in the chat, question is, has Africa ever been truly united? You're talking about a huge landmass, 3,000 ethnic groups, different religions, customs, etc. Honestly, think it's unrealistic. I was going to say, the same Great House put up a good post the other day. I was talking about it with Azuliism when I saw him during the week. That, there's this post from this Dahomean king. Can't remember the name right now, but the king was eloquently writing, like, listen, Africa was this place before the Europeans came. Africa was a place with many different peoples, even though they looked alike. It was many different peoples. And sometimes they had skirmishes. And sometimes they took prisoners of war, and those were the people they did with prisoners, as people tend to do with prisoners, which is whatever they wanted. So they sold them and stuff like that. But yeah, Africa, to me, always had a bunch of different people and always had little skirmishes and stuff like that. So I would say it was never really united, but Trigger Happy 262 posts something interesting. He says, I by no means am no expert, but I've been more exposed to some points that tribalism altogether might be recent, and Africans was detribalized for the most part. So you see, even I, my understandings and stuff like that can be challenged. And that's a good thing about Shoot Debris. We have different ideas, different understandings, and we can challenge some ideas, and we can all learn. But that's an interesting idea, that Africa wasn't so much tribal at one point. I've never even considered that. That's a very interesting point. Let's hear from Brother Carl on this.
So my thoughts on this, unity is a must because, Africans are facing an existential crisis on our people. I think that, he's right in that we dissolve those lines that were drawn in the Council of Berlin. That's we got to do that because those borders were created for the purpose of exploitation of Africa's resources. So we can't continue to have those borders. Now, how it would be redrawn, I don't know. But I do know that, I think that we can see how there can be ways to do things without losing Africa's, cultural distinctiveness. Similar to how it's done in the European Union. You have different European nations, but they still have a level of unity. They have a common currency. They're able to do that, and it worked for a little while until Great Britain decided to break away. But I can see some advantages in that because I understand the West doesn't want that because a united Africa will be able to call the shots. So much of the modern world depends on African resources that aren't found anywhere else in the world. So they need that. They're going to do everything possible to undermine that. So looking at that, because we do need that, eliminating the borders between that were drawn by the Europeans, that should have been done when independence was gained in most of the African states. And I think Kwame Nkrumah was often talked about Ghana being the first step in the United Africa. You see what happened with him; he got deposed. But because of the threat that poses to European hegemony over the world, So we got to start making those steps. How is it going to be done? I wouldn't know. I'm not. I've never. I'm not. I've never lived on the African continent, so I don't know the different uh, ethnic groups and animosities between them. But I think that that shouldn't really be a problem. We don't have Africans don't really have the history that Europeans had with infighting each other. You know, we waged two bloody genocidal world wars in Europe. But yet they're able to come when it comes down to business. They're able to unite, organize to get shit done. We should be able to do that. We don't have that history of hatred between Africans. So we had our wars, we had our problems, but I think we should be able to overcome and unite with that. So I'm gonna yield the mic on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. Let's have from, let me mix it up. Let me hear from Oni on this one.
Oh, peace. Yeah. So I think I saw when my brother from another mother, Xbox, was, or you guys call him Great House, I guess. Great House was talking about this, but unfortunately, I disagree with him on this one. I think Africa needs to look into making larger states, not smaller states. I think Harsh Reality D Web was saying and make sure you guys subscribe to D Web. But he was saying that he's not sure if Africa had a wide scale unity type stuff, right? And he said destruction of black civilization is like the ideal history book. What I like about destruction of black civilization too is that, like, somewhere in the back, I guess, he talks about the African Constitution, right? And he's outlining similar traits throughout the continent that he's noticed. I'm not saying everything is 100%, but he's saying there's a little variation here and there, but generally they had this sort of government, they had this sort of this, they had this sort of that, and it's all over Africa. Now, I want people to understand something about the world, about linguistics, about language, right? It's not really until the modern age, right, when you can have recordings where you can keep a language from changing, keep a language from transforming. Americans forcefully keep their English from transforming, because I remember I had a friend who was like, she went to journalist school because she talked so weird. I shouldn't say she talked weird, she did, but she used to talk like, and the time for us to act is now. And it's very clear, very proper. And so and it was weird because you're in Brooklyn, right? But her reasoning was that she went to journalism school, and in journalism school, what they do is they are very strict on you getting the Midwestern accent. So if you're trying to be on TV to tell the news, you have to learn how the Midwestern American talks. I'm guessing like Ohio region, right? That's why even if you're in the South, the lady could be all, Southern drawl, regularly. But when she's reporting the news, she's like, and today on Shoot the Breeze, we are, as opposed to, well, I'll shoot the breeze, whatever it might be, right? So if you don't have that sort of recording system, in a sense, right, the language is going to transform. So Old English, even the writing, is going to transform in the sense that Old English is not like Middle English, it's not like Modern English, not like so on and so forth. And if you really peep it, the dialects in America, if they were allowed to grow for like 1,000 years, they would become different languages if these people are not in deep contact. The same way how Cockney or the London or the Queen's English are different things in London and in England. And there's also different French dialects, different French, so on and so forth. This is what likely happens in Africa, right? Just the reality that if you do not have, recordings and you're in a large landmass, right? Different subgroups are going to start pronouncing things differently, especially as they start introducing new words into their own lexicon of their own account, of their own imagination. It's not going to be, oh, well, this language, let's say, because, some people don't want you using the word Bantu, but let's just say that the people of Cameroon might have spoken the same language once upon a time, the people in Tanzania. They're so far removed though, right? Even Tanzania is huge, right? But they're so far removed that if they're not really in communication, even if they are in communication, after 1,000 years, they're not going to speak the same language, right? All that to say that so sorry. So he's had the African Constitution. What I will go back and say is that I think that these, there were big empires in Africa like Mali, Shanghai, and ancient Ghana, right? They were big empires, and I think that that's kind of the route that African people have to take, because if you're seriously trying to be an economic or political force in this world, you do not want to just be a small group. And a lot of these groups were not formed, thousands of years ago. And the reality is that if you decide to close the borders around these small groups, you might be locking away resources that you can't have. I'll just end with this. Hitler was jealous of America, right? So this German guy was jealous of America because America was huge, because America was big. And his whole thing was, I need to expand Germany to look out for my German people. If we decide, oh no, actually, let's just be a smaller group, we're cooked. So I think that, if we're being serious, we should look into political thing. And speaking of Tanzania, the reason why I went to Tanzania is because like what Tanzania's name is, right? Nyerere united two different African countries, and he was ready to unite East African Federation. And East Africa might be the future because they're trying to unite. Some people are like, I don't know what West Africa's doing, but and of course, there's examples of, I guess, Mali again. Let's say Mali, and Gabon, I believe, right? But like, yeah, East Africa is like, we can, like, unity is a possibility, but like, we have to be on it. That's all I can say.
So only all the ideas of ethnic, you just put it out the door. You think it's too small in this new world. About how should we have 4 federated states in your opinion? Just north, east, west, south?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think 4 is a good number. You know what I'm saying? Like the ethnic thing. Well, the ethnic thing is like, again, I don't think these ethnicities are as strict as people make them out to be. And not just that, let's just be real, a lot of diaspora is disqualified from ethnicity. You know what I'm saying? Just off rip. But and of course, I mean, I guess I'm a diaspora, and so I gotta be like, hey, wait a second. But not to say that's it, but like, realistically, like, ethnicity is not that rich. And again, a lot of the ethnic groups were formed like for instance, like one of the, like, we were having a discussion about the best empires or the best civilizations in Africa, and actually that brother named a whole bunch of them, but one of them, he was like Dahomey, and it's like Dahomey is an example of a colonial era, quote unquote, civilization, quote unquote, tribe. You know what I mean? Like, these are people who became a people under the pressures of Europeans, European slavery. You know what I mean? Because the Europeans were wiping out a whole bunch of people. You know what I mean? They're wiping out a whole bunch of people, and so we had to form political collectives even back then in order to do stuff. I mean, another example of a political collective, I'm not 100% sure on the name, but after Shaka Zulu was doing his shit, and Shaka Zulu was, kind of like, well, first off, he created a political collective for the Zulu, but there were people who had to resist Shaka Zulu. And in resisting Shaka Zulu, they created their own political group. So that the Zulu could be a larger tribal body in a sense, right? Like today we'll be like, oh, this is Zululand, but that could have been an amalgamation, a political amalgamation. And just the same, the group that was resisting the Zulu was also just a newer formation. So a lot of it is that realistically, African people have been forming coalitions, forming political connections in order to defend themselves. Like even Egypt, we didn't really talk. I mean, I forgot to mention it. I wonder if I was skipped. I don't remember, but I don't have to mention it. But, when we asked why did the Mongolians not come into Africa, and the reason was that they lost the battle to the Mamelukes of Egypt. But Egypt, once upon a time, way back, was a political coalition of different groups. Some people would say it's 42 tribes. Like each of the 42 nomes were different tribal groups that came together for unity under the name of Kemet, which means black community. Or some people might say black means fertile, and some people might say black means, African, right? But whatever it is, they formed the political community where each of the 42 nomes actually, some of them were unintelligible to other ones, so again, like, yeah, we the whole idea of political unity in order to especially for self-defense, that's a thing. And going back in time is not a real option, in the sense that it's the colonial era that lost to these white boys when they didn't have drones. You know what I'm saying? When they didn't have drones. So if you lost to the white boys before they had drones, or when they just had, regular schmegular rifles, you know what I mean? And a Maxim gun, which is pretty good still. But when they just had that, they didn't have no airplanes and shit, then what you gonna do when they have airplanes? Like, come on. Like, nah.
Yeah, I gotta say, there's so much conversation in the chat. This point is this one comment from Trigger Happy. Yeah, like I just said, Oni made an excellent point. The Fawn are literally a mixture of three people: Akan, Yoruba, and Aja. Right? Yeah.
Hey, let me ask, where are these people when I'm doing my podcast? I don't got no comments in my. I'm joking. Well, no, not Gas though. Gas, you ain't invited, but the rest of everybody, because I mean, I might have the wrench here, but I definitely got the wrench there, so don't worry about it, Gas. You can stay out, but the rest of y'all come through tomorrow.
Yeah, for real. You guys check out Oni in the morning, and check out all the shows, man. Considra, her shows be at some, different times during the day and stuff. But when I come through, I don't see a lot of the folks there. You guys check out all the shows. I'm telling you, all the shows have something to offer. Hash Ali Podcast with Lero and D-Web, El Miguel and Ryan them. By the way, I heard Ryan got engaged. Right?
And Considra was cooking today. Y'all make sure y'all check her out.
Yeah. Considra was on Bakari. Oh, did she have her own show on today?
Well, I meant on Bakari's show, but yeah.
On Bakari's show, yeah. Considra was cooking on Bakari's show today. Forecast says, yeah, Considra on point. Yeah, make sure you guys check out all the shows, man. For real. House Shotty Podcast makes a point here. He says, you do your podcast at 11 a.m. on Sunday. We sleeping off the Appleton. I swear to you, when only shows about this, like 5 minutes before I wake up and look at the clock, I'm like, oh shit, let me tune in. Cause I be out of it after this show.
I don't know motherfuckers really be in church though. They be in church talking about, oh, your show's on. I'm purposely going on during the time that I know folk is at church. You know what I'm saying? Because y'all shouldn't be there.
Yeah, man. Check out all the other shows. I tell you, they all have something to offer. Is there any last thoughts on this prompt before we move on to the next? Did I get the next prompt? No, I did not.
No, I don't get this one.
Go ahead, Tan. Tan, did I skip you? Sorry, Tan. Tan, what are your thoughts on this one? Sorry.
I'll try to be brief.
No, take your time.
So for me, I think that firstly, we can't undo. That was a question that was posed during the independence years in the 60s, when they had the OAU conference in Ethiopia, and I think there was one in Accra, but I'm not sure. But they had those questions about, should we go back to how things were, or should we continue with the way the lines were drawn? And obviously, you see the answer. I don't think it's feasible to go back to, to how things were, because there weren't really like set borders. There was migrations. There were areas that were controlled by people from time to time. There was movement. So it was very fluid. And so I don't think that we can go back to that, because for administrative reasons, basically, the ideal model for me would be to continue with the borders, but to make them as fluid as possible, and to change them whenever it's possible. For example, there's this little border between, I think it's like Zambia and Chad and Burundi or something like that, where it's just like a tiny little border, and they expanded it just a few years ago. I'll find the information. But you can change borders between countries and say, let's expand this, let's increase this, let's give these other people more area and so on. So I think that we can, we should be open to playing around with the borders and changing them to suit both countries. Obviously, that would be difficult because you still have an agreement. And then on the second thing about unifying countries, I would still say, under tribal lines, it's not to say, oh, for me, tribalism is, just a concept of, just like, oh, superiority. But while Africans were tribal, we didn't really, there wasn't like this tribal superiority. It was a tribal pride, but not necessarily, at the expense of somebody else. So I think that we can still live in peace. I think there should be regional territories where tribes that are, related to each other should be allowed to form, some kind of association, whether economic, whether land, and that's when the borders should be porous. It should be, firstly, they should be changeable, based on negotiation and what works best for both sides. And the second thing, that there should be some kind of informal regional alliances that transcend the borders. So, for example, the Maasais are in Tanzania and Kenya. They should be able to form a Kenyan, Tanzanian, Maasai nation where they, they legislate over matters that affect their communities and so on. So, and they're able to help each other or cooperate between nations. So I think something like that would both be realistic in terms of still having a government to conduct affairs with other government, but also giving voice to those tribal unities that were there before, and not just in intertribal, but also tribal relations, because there are people who have tribes who have really they're similar, they have similar customs. So instead of putting them in one, pen, in one box, I think it should be an open, there should be a gate where people can go in between, their different, national prison pens. Yeah. That's it for me.
I appreciate that, Tan. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump over you in the chat. I like what Lero said. She said, Pan-Africanist sees a state. The only option is expansion. Not one little Pan-African nation, like just make Pan-Africanism an ethnicity then, LOL. Trigger Happy 262 seems to like that. He says, and we have to avoid isolation, because isolation surrounded by Askari states is exactly how our revolutionaries lost. That's what he says to Lero. He says Sankara was surrounded by Askari states. Good conversation in the chat, like I said. Does anyone want to add anything else to this prompt?
Yeah, I guess
Go ahead.
I suppose it's not impossible. I mean, I think one thing to consider, time differences. I mean, if you want to use time as a measuring stick, I mean, using time zones, even though I know I'm saying time zones is, what I'm saying, but the purpose of it, things are going to be, Africa is not on the same type of time, what I'm saying, literally, what I'm saying, the East Coast is in a different time zone than the West. Knowing that, and knowing how, if you're trying to if you need things to happen in a certain amount of time, having that sense of dividing it up, not in a permanent way, but just in a kind of a, divvy it up by the time, what I'm saying? If Africa has about, I think I want to say like 4 or 5 time zones, I mean, you can kind of have a general sense that, you might want to divide it up in some sense, in the sense that, in traveling and just moving from place to place, I mean, there's practicalities about these things. Time zones can be, what I'm saying, you can warp them, you can change them up a little bit, but at some point, being on the same type of time, in more ways than one, would help. And if we can get all the black people on the same type of time to kind of coalesce, even though if you superimpose that, we see what's going on. It all kind of conflicts in the same time, all that. But it does help. I mean, there's things that just knowing where the population centers are, where we are, and people can move around, but you don't want people to necessarily move around all the time because people want to stand still. You know, they want to be, and that, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes you got to fight that off. You know, on the pessimism, I mean, as long as you have these leaders who really want to vouch for the status quo. I mean, who truly are not like who are truly not advancing. You know what I'm saying? Their leadership is backwater. They're not doing anything. They're enriching themselves and their cronies. They have no vision. You don't hear anything coming out of their countries worth in anything. I mean, damn, you don't want to be that guy. It's like, you know, if you're looking across the hills, it's like, man, it's like, you know, maybe I might have to shake you off, you know what I'm saying, get some coin out of it, you know what I'm saying, redistribute it to the people and be the good guy, you know. Sometimes it's like that. And I'm gonna yield again.
I appreciate that, RBG. By the way, Trigger, I added you in a forum that Uwa created on the Discord, so you guys should link. You guys should definitely link on the Discord. If there's no other comments for that prompt, let me go to Shoot the Breeze topic number 9 tonight. We're making real good time. Looks like we'll be done with 10 topics at 2 a.m. Thank you again to everyone who joined us tonight, who hit the like button, who hit the share button. Make sure you guys check out all the other shows on KWAZ Radio. Check out kwazradio.com. There's a merch store there. Check out the Discord. The link is in the description. You guys join the Discord. We could continue a lot of these conversations there together.